Hi everyone, welcome back to Misinformation in Science and Society. Here to listen, not to judge. I'm your host Annie, and today with us we have Rachel Zamzow. Alright, so welcome. Could you please introduce yourself a little bit and what you do?
Sure. I am Rachel Zamzow, and I'm a science journalist and editor based in Central Texas.
Yeah. So why did you choose this career initially?
So I actually wasn't trained in journalism initially. I went to graduate school for a PhD in neuroscience, and about halfway through that program, I had a mini existential crisis of I don't enjoy, being in the lab doing the work of a scientist, and I just can't see myself doing this forever. And I kind of really thought hard about what I love to do, and writing has always been a passion of mine. And so I had known that people specialize in science journalism. And so I started taking some classes and really just found a very deep interest in that topic. So I just continued to seek out training opportunities in journalism. And yeah, that's kind of how I ended up in that path.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what's like your favorite part of um doing what you do now?
Um, there's a lot of things. I think one in particular is just getting to, when I interview scientists, getting to hear them talk about what is most interesting to them about the work that they do.
Mm.
It's really the most fun calls or interviews with a scientist happen when they just light up and you can see how much passion they have for their research area, especially when they're talking about problems they're trying to solve and that they're still working at whittling away different aspects of a certain problem. And when they just clearly can show that they're so interested in that topic, is it's just a really fun conversation when you get to interview scientists like that.
Yeah. Um, so why do you think that like truth and like correct information is so important and why misinformation is such a big issue, like especially right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think truth is so important because it's what people use to inform their decision making. So if you think about someone who's seeking healthcare, what they consider to be truth affects what types of decisions they make regarding what doctors they seek out or if they seek out a doctor at all.
Mhm.
And that can then affect their ultimate health outcome. So truth really can be a life or death thing. And the problem of misinformation comes in a lot right now when it comes especially to journalism is people tend to have somewhat of a distrust of the media or even science in general, and they, because they feel like they can't trust it for whatever reason, they don't know then how to make whatever decision they're making. They don't know where to look for quality information. They don't know how to verify whether what they're seeing on Facebook or Twitter is true. And so it kind of has a downstream effect of if someone doesn't know what is truth, then they don't know how to make a decision.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so how do people in your field, like science journalists, try to like tackle or avoid misinformation in like science journalism?
Sure. One thing that is a big area in journalism as far as tackling misinformation is avoiding what we call false balance. So, old school journalists would always, if it was a topic they were covering that was slightly controversial and there were various sides of an argument, they would try to achieve what they called balance, where they get everybody's opinion from all sides of an argument. But
Mhm.
in the sciences, when you have certain areas that are controversial, but there's a lot of weight of scientific evidence on one side of the issue. So some of those examples are climate change, vaccines and their efficacy. There's a lot of weight that climate change is real, it's happening, and there's also a lot of weight that vaccines are important and that they work and that they don't cause things like autism. And so the problem, if you stick with those old school journalistic mentality of achieving balance in a story, if you seek out a climate change denier or an anti-vaccine advocate, you are sort of inflating the sides of that argument that aren't necessarily based in science. And a reader would then take the story that a journalist wrote with that type of balance and think, well, I don't know what's true. This person says this scientist that says this. And so in science journalism, especially, we try to avoid that, what we call false balance. And we really only report what is based in scientific evidence. So if you're writing a climate change story, it is perfectly fine and the better choice really to interview only climate change experts and not to seek out an interview with someone who, denies climate change or quotes science that isn't good to try to further their perspective.
That's something I've like never heard of before, and yeah, that's really cool and very interesting.
Mm.
Um, so what do you think is like the worst type of misinformation? Like about what?
Yeah, I mean, the two examples I just shared are some of the worst, and a lot of the work that I cover as a reporter is in autism research. And so it does get frustrating when people talk about vaccines, and I tend to get on a little soapbox and just start explaining some of the evidence that is refuting what people claim to be a link between vaccines and autism. And a lot of that information is very out of date, and the original studies that people cite to uh, further that claim is that evidence has been refuted and the authors on that paper are largely discredited. But that type of information isn't always out there. So people might just see a really old study cited and think it's supported by research. But if you've been following the field for a while, it's clear that that research is no longer accepted within the community. So that's a pretty bad piece of misinformation because it's affecting in people's healthcare choices for their families. And if journalists make the choice to include someone who falls into that camp of anti-vaccine, of of that perspective, then it's going to confuse readers even more.
Mhm. Yeah. So for journalism, there's obviously like this paper, I guess, and also digitally. Um, Especially like recently there's more like digitally maybe. So like what do you think about like the invention of technology and its impact on misinformation?
Yeah, that's one thing we've been talking about in my field a lot, especially with AI tools like ChatGPT and things like that,
Hmm.
is how we can adapt to not only understand that technology, but utilize it to the best of our ability, but also not take it too far. So we've been talking a lot about, can you use ChatGPT to help you when you're researching a story? And how much can you trust that information that it gives you? Because a lot of its training information is fed from the internet, and the internet can't always be trustworthy. So you have to think about how you use the tools to what kind of prompts you give the tool to give you information and how you can evaluate its truth. And so, you know, we would never be writing a story via Chat GPT, but if you're trying to find a scientist, you could ask Chat GPT to tell you every scientist that studies a certain topic, and then you can go and use that information to find a source that you would like to talk to. So it's kind of like using it as a research tool, but not necessarily as I'm going to use this to write my story type of tool.
Yeah. Um, so what do you think is like the best way or what is something that like a regular person can do to avoid or reduce misinformation in their life and like just society in general that's not like a big platform or like things like that, just like a regular person?
Sure. I think just always questioning where you are getting your information. So a lot of times someone will come to me like, well, I saw this thing about this and it said, this kind of scary sounding statistic or something like that. I'm like, where did you read that? And they'll be like, Facebook. And I'm like, okay, so yeah, you've got to think about where you're getting your information. And so it comes down to what type of news you're reading, from where, and what agenda might that news source have. So is it a reputable organization? Or if you're reading scientific literature, is it a peer-reviewed study, or is it from a journal that isn't necessarily as trustworthy? So kind of instead of taking what you read as truth off the bat, interrogating it a little bit further to see what type of information it is and where it came from can really help just anybody be a better consumer of information.
Yeah. Okay. So I think those are all my questions about misinformation. Do you have anything else to add before like two final like fun questions?
Um, I don't think so.
All right. So the first question is what inspires you in life? Like what are some of your inspirations? That's like a person, idea, book, etc.
Yeah. It's kind of for my personal life as well as my job. I really get inspiration from great writing. So I
Mm.
try to read lots of different types of books, whether it's, the popular, fiction books that are out well as nonfiction from some of my favorite writers. And whenever I read a certain turn of phrase or a way of somebody describing something that I just think is really beautiful, I get a lot of enjoyment out of it, and it sort of gets my own wheels turning about how to write about certain things. I love reading people's memoirs for that reason too, having them describe events that happen in their life in a certain way is just a cool way to learn about people and think about the craft of writing itself.
Yeah, that's awesome. And do you have any advice for people, especially teens?
Just any type of advice.
Yeah, like misinformation or just like life.
Yeah. I just remember being really stressed out as a teenager in high school, thinking that every single decision or every single class or grade was sort of the most important thing in the world. And I think just I would tell, if I was talking to myself in high school, I would say just calm down, take a break, try to enjoy the fun parts of school and being a teenager, and not to place so much weight on every single aspect of life, because there's just so much more to come. And even if it feels life or death in the moment, it probably isn't.
All right. Thank you for that. And thank you for this whole interview and for making time. It was really fun talking to you.
You
So
too. Thank you so much for having me.
yeah, take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.